My life can officially be divided into two parts, before and after Superman, because this movie changed me and made me want to become a better person in ways I've always dreamed of seeing from a Superman film. It's been 3 hours since I watched this movie, and I still have the biggest, goofiest smile on my face. I don't even know how I'm supposed to talk about this movie. The video is probably like an hour long, so clearly I'll figure it out, but there's so much I want to discuss that I don't even know where to start. It's almost overwhelming. It's been over 10 years since the last proper Superman movie, and in that time I've gone from not caring about the character to becoming obsessed with him to the point where he's now one of my favorite superheroes. This film almost feels like the culmination of that journey to love Superman, and I am very happy to report that it didn't disappoint in the slightest. There was not a single second of this movie that I didn't love. The Gunn simply does not miss. Superman is a comic book come to life in ways I never knew were possible in a film adaptation, and beaming with so much heart that I couldn't help but have the best time with it. A beautiful story that balances its many elements shockingly well with a perfect cast and the most creative action possible. You'll once again believe a man can fly, but more important than that, you'll believe a man can be good. And when I say that this movie is a comic come to life, I truly mean that it felt like opening up a comic book and just jumping right into the story. For almost 2 decades, it feels like we've been escaping this shadow of realism in comic book movies where everybody's trying to ground things and figure out how superheroes would operate in the real world. But Superman doesn't even try and attempt to do a story like that. There are so many larger-than-life elements in this film that feel like they were ripped straight out of the comics, as they fully embrace the fantastical and give us this world that is completely unlike our own. Whether it be a fictional golden city like Metropolis that carves its own history, or bringing in these otherworldly elements like kaijus, anti-proton rivers, pocket dimensions, interdimensional creatures, casually name-dropping the most ridiculous stuff possible, but they do it with so much sincerity that they're never poking fun at these ideas and taking them 100% seriously. Even down to seeing Superman finally wear the trunks again to make himself feel more approachable to children. The film isn't shying away from anything and knows exactly what makes Superman Superman. It feels like the superhero genre has finally reached its full potential with a movie like this, where they're not afraid to do these very cheesy things. And it's not going to be for everyone, but for someone like me who has yearned to see these kind of incredible larger-than-life stories brought to the big screen, it feels like the kickstart of a new era of superhero storytelling where they're not trying to run away from what these characters are. And I greatly appreciated that. It is by far one of this film's biggest strengths. Literally hopping right into the action mid-fight as we see a world that is fully developed with superhero teams already established and dynamics between heroes and villains as we get this classic tale of good versus evil. They don't waste any time reheating the original origin story, as this movie is primarily concerned with just telling a great Superman story, trusting the audience to buy into these concepts, and knowing that they're going to be able to pick up what's happening with context clues, as the movie very much so shows you what's happening. And none of this would be possible or as successful as it is if we didn't have David Corenswet in the role as Superman. I am truly convinced that he was grown in a petri dish to play this character. It feels like he was born to be Superman. He radiates so much warmth and adds new layers of complexity and depth to Clark that I have been dying to see. There's a real sense of vulnerability and approachability that he brings to the role, which makes Superman feel more human than ever. We get to see a version of Superman who is 3 years into his career and is still grappling with the idea of what he's supposed to be as a hero. This internal conflict between what he wants to do and what the world wants him to be, as he tries to be good in a world where being good is hard. The world around him is trying to overcomplicate the simple ideas of being a helpful figure, and seeing Clark grapple with that concept and try and figure out how he can be Superman in a world that doesn't even want him there is a fascinating concept that truly does humanize such an incredibly powerful character. I really appreciate that we get to see David's take on Clark be so vulnerable in more ways than one. On an emotional level, we're seeing him open up and talk about his feelings and actually get to feel like a real character and someone with wants and needs and opinions, and have this actual personality to him where he feels like a real person who is raised with these wholesome ideals and is just trying to do what he can to help the world be a better place. And it's nice to see that kind of nuance from someone like Superman. This version of Superman values all life, whether it be men, women, and children, or even the smallest animals like a dog or a squirrel at one point. Even robots to an extent. You can really see the toll it takes on him whenever a life is lost, and it's that kind of care and respect he has for humanity and what it has to offer that I think really makes him stand apart from the rest of these live-action Supermen. But I also really appreciate just how physically vulnerable he is, because he gets his ass kicked a lot in this movie. Literally, the opening scene has him crashing down into the Arctic. And I think that so many people get lost in the idea that Superman is this overpowered character who can't take any damage, when seeing him get thrown around and ragdolled like this is what makes him even more of an inspirational hero as he gets up and keeps fighting no matter how insurmountable the odds are. It just takes things to the next level as we get to see this version of Superman be someone who actually feels and is able to get hurt. That is my personal favorite kind of Superman. I could never get behind the idea that he's a character with godlike abilities and is untouchable to anything but kryptonite, because I just feel like that's boring. So adding in this sense of vulnerability makes him much more of a relatable character, and I really appreciate all the work David does to separate his Clark from his Superman, because they truly do feel like two completely different characters. And to me, the way they do things, it really feels like Superman is the performance, while Clark is the true representation of who he is, even to the point where we see him reciting lines and practicing how he wants to be Superman, just trying to do his best and put on this face and be the hero that he knows he can be and the one that the world needs. There are a lot of subtle changes and mannerisms that really differentiate the two, even down to his voice, where when he's talking as Clark Kent, it's much more higher pitched and positive. He's doing a lot more physical acting as you see him hunched over and being a real clumsy person in the Daily Planet offices, as he's this goofy guy, but he does some great acting with his body language as you see someone so big trying not to take up much space and is trying to make sure he draws as little attention as possible. And I really have to commend David for putting in all this extra effort to differentiate all these different sides of Superman, from the mild-mannered, clumsy Daily Reporter Clark Kent to the confident and friendly Superman that we see going around and saving everybody, to the stubborn, unsure person he is outside of the costume. He's a multifaceted character that you need a really talented actor to pull off, and David Cornsweet is doing that with flying colors. Pun very much so intended. Also, I adore how cheesy David's take on Superman is, and I mean that in the best possible way. Casually using phrases like golly and what the hey is so endearing with David's delivery and goes a long way to make him feel like a comforting friend. Some people might find it corny, but this man was raised in Kansas, alright? He was born on the cob, and that is the kind of Superman I have dreamed of seeing, man. Oh god, I'm getting way too into this. I just accidentally punched the microphone, so sorry about that, but I am incredibly passionate about Superman and this movie. It feels like it was tailor-made for me, as they get his characterization right in ways I never expected to see on the big screen. This would not be half the film it is if we didn't have someone like David Cornsweet in the role. He's able to bring so much nuance to the character through performance alone, and elevates an already great script with his take on the Man of Steel. There wasn't a single moment watching this movie that I thought I was watching an actor play Superman. It truly felt like Superman was just existing in real life in a way that I don't think we've seen since the Christopher Reeve movies. And I know what I'm about to say is a bold and controversial statement, but after thinking it through for a while, I can confidently say that David Cornsweet is my favorite person to play Superman. Previously, it was Tyler Hoechlin, and the only reason I give David the edge is that he's playing a much more traditional and younger Superman, while Tyler had his own unique take on the character who was grown up and had a family. And while I think he did a fantastic job and gave such an underrated performance as both Clark and Superman, David has the advantage of playing the most traditional version of Superman that we've ever seen, and it really scratched an itch that I've had for a long time to see that in live action. I felt almost an immediate connection with him, as he truly just feels like Superman in every single way. It's honestly scary. I've talked a big game about the concept of hope and how I've wanted to see a Superman adaptation that could stand the test of time as a shining light of positivity in the genre, and this movie delivered on just that for me. I'm not ashamed to say that I cried 3 times watching the film, and one of them was entirely because of the overwhelming power of hope alone. James Gunn understands that Superman is a very powerful symbol across the globe, and I really love how this movie shows that through his actions. Despite all of the conflict and problems Clark faces when his legacy is challenged, he never changes who he is and is able to show the world that he's nothing more than a friendly face at every given turn. Seeing the world not give up on him because they know he's there for truth, justice, and a better tomorrow is so beautiful, to the point where just the image of a kid holding up a Superman flag is enough to bring me to tears. Such impactful storytelling, and made me feel like my veins were pumped full of pure hope and adrenaline. I've never felt this way when watching a movie before, where I just come out of it happier to be in this world. I feel like I'm talking in hyperbole here, but it's one of those special movies that just makes you appreciate the small things in life, and that's exactly the kind of feeling you want coming out of a Superman film. But it also gave me hope for other things, like the future of this universe. A universe that puts characters first and looks to tell bold new stories that reinvent the wheel and do these characters justice. The future of the DCU is bright with Gunn and Superman leading the charge. And I can't stress enough that if anything bad ever happens to Krypto, I'm killing everyone responsible and then myself. He is absolutely the worst dog in the universe, but that only makes me love him more. Some of the hardest laughs I've had in a theater were from him, okay? He is the cutest dog ever. And surprisingly enough, that's probably the most I can say about Krypto right now because there are a lot of spoilers surrounding him. But I can talk more about fan of the channel Rachel Brosnahan.
The whole shebang.
Clearly, she's a subscriber and that wasn't taken wildly out of context by me. She is without a doubt my favorite Lois Lane. It's like you shook a comic book and she fell right out of it. This movie is hers just as much as it is Superman's, and that is exactly what you want to see in that dynamic. She is integral to the plot and gets to be her own character, making choices that directly push the narrative forward. And Rachel commands the screen so naturally. Her chemistry with David is next level. It's the exact kind of dynamic I want to see out of my Clark and Lois, as Clark has fallen head over heels in love with her as the simple farm boy that he is, while Lois is unsure about the relationship because she is someone who was taught to question everything as a journalist, so she doesn't know if she's ready for this kind of commitment. And I think because of that, we get to see Lois challenge Clark in some really interesting ways as they clash heads a lot throughout the film. They aren't this perfect couple, in fact they're pretty much polar opposites personality-wise, but I think that only goes to accentuate why they're so perfect for each other, as they kind of complete each other in a sense. Clark sees the world in such a simple way, as he just wants to help people and do good, and Lois is there to kind of ground him and pull him back into reality and remind him that things aren't in black and white. It isn't as simple as good versus evil, and there's a lot more nuance in the world that she is able to guide him through. And I think that it's incredibly important for Superman to have someone like that in his life. While the film does skip to the point where Lois already knows that Clark is Superman, I think it's definitely for the better because it allows us to see her interact with him in a way that we've never seen on screen, where she's being a complete hard ass in interviews, asking him hard-hitting questions because she's a damn good journalist and is gonna get the job done. She is so steadfast and confident in her work to the point where she will do whatever it takes to get that story, and it is exactly what I want to see out of my Lois Lane. I can absolutely say with 100% confidence that Rachel Brosnahan is the single best Lois Lane we may ever see, and we've had a lot of great Loises in the past. She has such a presence on screen and is allowed to operate as her own independent character in a way that really benefits her. There's a scene towards the start of the film where we get to see Lois interviewing Clark, and I think that it sets up the movie in a really great way as we get to understand the conflict from the way these characters perceive it, and the way that they use Lois as someone who's there to really force Superman to look in himself and figure out why he's doing these things and what kind of hero he wants to be, not only gives him more depth, but it gives Lois a lot of interesting motivation as we get to see her struggle with the fact that she doesn't know if these two could be together because he's so unsure of himself while she's completely sure of who she is and what she wants in life. There are so many little moments too that show me why she's such a great Lois, like when the city is falling apart around her and the only care she has in the world is how she can find the scoop she needs on Lex, with so much attitude and charisma. But by far, the absolute standout of the entire film that I think we're all going to be talking about for decades to come is Nicholas Hoult. He is going down as the definitive take on Lex Luthor. I can't say enough good things about his performance to the point where it feels so real and authentic, as if he actually does hate Superman, and given the fact that David Cornsweet got the role ahead of him, he honestly might just be channeling that energy into his performance. His pettiness and envy take center stage as an immediate contender for one of my favorite comic book movie villains of all time. This man has redefined what it means to be a hater. He is truly generational casting. I really love the fact that Holt's take on Lex is almost a cartoonishly evil villain, but I mean that in the most complimentary way possible. They don't try and give him this justification for why he's right doing what he's doing, but you get to understand his motivations as clear as day and see just how absolutely disgusting he is as a person, where he can't stand the idea that someone is getting more attention than him. He looks at Superman like this cheater, someone who arrived on Earth and had everything handed to him as he was given these powers naturally, while Lex had to, in his eyes, work as hard as possible to attain the position he's in. And now, despite everything he's done to become one of the smartest men in the entire universe, and someone who can casually make scientific breakthroughs without breaking a sweat, is now being overshadowed by a guy going around and not only stopping what he's doing, but making the world a better place and drawing the attention off of him. And I know that pretty much every take on Lex Luthor is defined by their jealousy, but I think that Nicholas Holt's version takes that to the next level as someone who has studied Superman for years just so he can make his life worse in the smallest possible ways. It really feels like he's made it his entire purpose to take down Superman, more than any other version of Lex Luthor that we've seen. He's such a smug asshole in the film, as every single calculated decision he makes is all for the benefit of himself, with complete and utter disregard for the rest of the world, going as far as to say that people that chose Superman deserve to die. He honestly makes Reverse Flash look nice in comparison, and I mean that 100% genuinely. There are some insanely hateful acts in this movie that caught me completely by surprise, but it shows the lengths Lex is willing to go to embarrass Superman and turn the public against him, and he's just like so aggressively bald. There's truly never been a more bald person in the history of people being bald. His head is so shiny and smackable. I just want to give it a nice little leave a handprint on that chrome dome, you know what I'm saying? The only thing bigger than that bald head is his ego, because there's this sense of arrogance and annoyance and desperation that reeks from him that makes him the perfect Lex Luthor, walking around like he owns the place, because he honestly does. A lot of the time when you make a villain so straightforwardly spiteful, it can come off as underdeveloped or uninteresting, but it's Nicholas Holt's performance that is able to really sell him as this force of evil in Metropolis. When I say this movie is incredibly comic booky, Lex Luthor is a large reason for that, as he is so brilliant to the point that you can't help but be impressed, even though he's using that genius to make everybody's lives worse. He carries himself with such a smug attitude and is a true villain through and through. I think it's a really smart idea to use Lex as the driving force of conflict for Superman, as he is directly questioning what right an alien has to do these things on Earth. There's this echo of xenophobia in all of his actions, as he's clearly afraid of someone who is from a different race, this time of super beings, that is going to arrive and replace him, and it does a great job of leaning into the political commentary surrounding a character like Superman with this immigrant status he has, and I think that it really helps just show how unlikable Lex is. This movie is perfectly cast top to bottom. I think you could pick out anyone and commend their performance, but coming out of this film, I think that everybody's gonna have a lot of great things to say about Nicholas Holt's performance and his take on Lex Luthor, because he knocked it out of the park. He is doing some brilliant work here. And while we're talking about people who are doing good work, because I think that's a great segue, James Gunn's camera work in this film is a real standout. Every single shot feels carefully crafted to show what's on screen in the most interesting and dynamic way possible. He's got some really thoughtful direction that enhances literally every single scene to make the movie feel so alive and full of energy. Going back to that idea that this is a perfect comic book movie come to life, a large reason for that is the way James Gunn operates the camera. It feels like the big action splash pages were brought to life as we see the camera moving around and almost acting as its own character. The way you see it make quick movements or turn corners, or especially in the flight scenes, which are outstanding and by far the best that Superman has ever looked when flying on screen, which is a very specific category, but with how many Superman adaptations there are, it's a very impressive achievement to have. I really love the point of view flying shots. I think that it adds this whole new element that really makes you feel like you're flying with Superman, but it's in shots like this where you see Superman take off and the camera struggling to catch up with him, where I think they're using the camera to its maximum potential as they're directly showing you just how fast Superman is. It really feels like Gunn is making sure to use this visual medium in the most spectacular way that he can. I don't know if this is a recency bias, but this might be the single coolest and most creative use of superpowers in live action. You can tell that there was so much thought put into the choreography ahead of time, because we're seeing Superman do things that we've never seen on screen before, where he's lasering people around him in this big ball of energy, or punching someone so hard that the tooth bounces off the camera, which is exactly the kind of really exciting action that I love to see. Superman has truly never looked cooler on screen than we see in this movie, because the action scenes are incredibly exciting and dynamic. Mr. Terrific gets one standout scene that might be the best action scene in the entire movie. Honestly, my jaw genuinely dropped. He has set the bar on how cool a character should be. That man was farming aura like it was his job. And I really like the choice to have most of Superman's action scenes being him just saving people. We know he's impervious to all this damage, so having him go out of his way to make it his priority to help the people around him not only adds to the stakes, but it shows his humanity. And the cinematography absolutely rocks, man. I don't want to hear otherwise. I feel like the trailers were underselling just how good this movie looks. Out of the entire film, there's only really one or two shots that I didn't like. It feels like the lighting was a little too overexposed in this one specific shot's case. Besides that though, the colors are so vibrant in a way that really emphasizes the larger-than-life nature of the DCU. And I think that we're finally seeing these superheroes done justice as we see Superman in this incredibly bright costume illuminating scenes to the point where you can see him through fog so far away just because of how well defined that costume is. I could make, and have in the past, an entire video about how much I love this Superman costume, so I'll try and keep my thoughts to a minimum here. I can add another hour to the runtime talking about every little detail of it, but I love this suit so much. From the trunks, to the cape, to the colors, to the emblem. I think it even makes the collar work somehow. I really like how it's shot on screen because it stands out and pops so well among the bright and vibrant oranges and blues that they use in the film. Gunn has definitely tweaked the cinematography as well from the trailers, as there's much more of a golden hue that I think really benefits things like the city of Metropolis, which makes it feel a lot more like it's taking place in another universe. So I think that I can finally say that with this movie, I can forgive Henry Bram for his work on The Flash. He has redeemed himself in my eyes because this movie looks great. And this is very much so a James Gunn Superman movie in every sense of that term, if that even makes sense. It has that signature lighthearted tone that he's become known for, and it is really funny, but it also feels different from any other movie that he's made. There's less of that crude, raunchy humor he's become known for, and he's really taken a step back on the violence. You can tell that James Gunn has this deep respect for the character. He steps away from using his usual superhero movie tropes and does everything in his power to do the character of Superman justice. It stands apart from the rest of his filmography as this beacon of hope, and I think that it really shows his talent as a filmmaker, where he's able to adjust his style in a way that fits the character. One of the biggest examples of this is that this movie relies mostly on score rather than soundtrack. Every single one of his superhero projects, from Guardians of the Galaxy to the Suicide Squad to Peacemaker, has been very heavily reliant on these needle drops. He's often said in the past that he uses them as a crutch to enter the story through the lens of music, but for a character like Superman, you can't really do something like that, and I think that the change away from the soundtrack towards a score is an incredibly smart decision that really emphasizes the epic scale of a character like Superman, as he's backed by this beautiful score by John Murphy and David Fleming. Their soundtrack is electric. The way they remixed the iconic Williams theme into something new and bold had me ready to run through a wall. I get chills just thinking about it. I cannot wait to listen to the soundtrack over and over again while I'm editing this video, and then probably just forever after that because it is iconic already to me. Using the electric guitar to remix that theme by John Williams really modernizes it in a way, but Murphy and Fleming are able to do these new arrangements of the theme that make it stand out and feels like a tribute to Superman as a whole. They are embracing the past and looking towards the future as they position David Cornsweet as the future of the DCU going forward. It's almost like a passing of the torch in a symphonic way as they double down on him being the Superman, and I think it only helps to accentuate just how well David fits into the role. But here's the thing. I've been glazing this movie for probably like 20 to 30 minutes by now, and while I do think it's deserved, this movie is not perfect. I think there are two things that hold this back from being a masterpiece. One I'm going to talk about right now, and the other I'm going to have to save for the spoiler section. There is a lot going on, and I think that it really could have used an extra 10 to 15 minutes just to give the film some time to breathe. It moves at a breakneck pace, going from scene to scene, as if you're reading a comic book, going from panel to panel, and because of that, they are forced to sacrifice character work to benefit the pacing. If I could give you an example, someone like Ultraman felt underutilized to me. I would have liked to spend more time with him and really dive deeper into what he represents in the grand scheme of things and Lex and Superman's rivalry. He's not in it as much as I thought he would be, and is acting more as a plot device than a character in and of himself. That being said, the movie flows very naturally and nothing feels like it's being forced into the narrative. It is a very tight script that utilizes all of these elements in a way that is integral to the plot. I just think it could have benefited from a little bit more time to slow the flow and expand on these characters just a bit in some quieter moments. My favorite scene in the movie is a very intimate moment between Clark and Pa Kent, and it's small things like that which make the big moments matter. It's incredibly ambitious to kickstart the DCU in this way with so many elements and subplots going on at once, and I think that it works where it needs to, but it's held back by characters not getting as much of a satisfying payoff as I would have liked to have seen. With how many different superheroes this movie introduces, it balances them all way better than I could have ever expected, and the DCU is established with such a strong foundation for the future more. Also, not to take a hard left turn into another tangent, but I really appreciate that this movie is unapologetically political and takes very firm stances. Superman is inherently a political character, so it's nice to see them not shy away from that and embrace his status as a champion of the oppressed. The political messaging relates heavily to a real-world genocide happening as we speak in the Middle East, but I really respect that James Gunn isn't afraid to use everything with the hammer of Boravia as a clear allegory for what's going on, and how you have characters and nations being funded by billionaires to try and wipe out a less fortunate and heavily underarmed country that has every right to exist and should be freed. I applaud the fact that we have a Superman movie that isn't afraid to take a stance on real-world events to the point where you have Superman directly calling one side evil. Never in my life would I have expected a $200 million blockbuster to do something like this, but it's genuinely great to see because we get this scathing critique on American imperialism and billionaires and genocide, and it doesn't feel out of place and is very naturally woven into the story, and that is really powerful to see. I have a lot that I want to say about the themes of the film, but I want to save that for the spoiler section so I can talk freely, so I'll just say that I really like how it tackles legacy and humanity. Diving into David's inner conflict through that lens lets him come out as the beacon of hope that Superman should be. Gunn just perfectly understands exactly what makes Superman interesting. I could honestly talk about every little aspect of this movie for hours on end. It blew me away in ways that I couldn't ever prepare for. But to wrap up this non-spoiler section of the video, Superman made me feel a way that I haven't felt watching a superhero movie in a long time. It's the genre at its best and easily my favorite Superman film. And I can say that because I spent the last week rewatching every single Superman movie, and most of them are bad. But this is the Superman movie that I've always dreamed of, where we get to see this character act as this force of good in the world and someone who is happy to help out the little guy and just wants to use these abilities for the greater good and saving people. This is the Superman movie for me. If I was held at gunpoint by James himself to give it a rating out of 5 stars, I think that I would go with a 4.5 out of 5 just because it blew me away in ways that I could have never imagined, as they do so much in this movie, but because of that, it also means that you don't get enough time with certain characters that I think could have benefited with an extra 10 to 15 minutes. But that's one small thing working against this movie, against the dozens of things I love this film for. You can just tell that every ounce of this film was made with so much care and passion from everybody behind the camera and wanted to create the best possible movie they could, and they came pretty much as close as you possibly could to making a perfect movie. I know the title says that Superman is a perfect comic book movie, and I mean that in the sense that it is a comic book come to life in ways that I could have never even dreamed of. Not that it is a perfect movie as a whole. If that makes any sense, I have no clue. I rationalize it in my head in a way where it captures the spirit and the tone of the comic books in a flawless translation, but as a film, there are certain things that it struggles with on a technical level, if that explains it. It has an incredible cast doing some of the best work of their careers, bringing these characters to life and embodying them in ways that you can only see in the comics up to this point, shot in such a way that gives it a really unique visual style that makes it feel like we're finally seeing a comic book come to life on screen, and I am so happy with what we got. Even now, as I've been recording for over an hour before I edit all this audio down, I still haven't stopped smiling, and I think that says a lot to the quality of this film and how it made me feel. Okay, and with all that being said, I think it's finally time to talk about the spoilers for this film. I'm honestly surprised I managed to make it 27 minutes without needing to talk spoilers, but I can't hold it back anymore. So without further ado, it's spoiler time. I can't believe they did pink kryptonite. I really didn't see that coming, but I mean, hey, props to James Gunn for taking such a strong stance on it. Okay, that was just to scare everybody who didn't click off the video in time. Now we're gonna actually talk about the spoilers. There are a lot of surprises in the film, but I think the biggest one of them all is how it handles Clark's Kryptonian heritage. Within the first 5 minutes, we get an appearance from his parents Jor-El and Lara as they appear as holograms in the Fortress of Solitude, which really caught me by surprise. Not the fact that Jor-El was being played by Bradley Cooper of all people, because I had that spoiled to me months in advance, which is really cool and definitely didn't piss me off. But I think it's a very bold take to introduce these two characters to the audience and then pull the rug right out from under us to reveal that James Gunn is doing a take on Krypton where they are these conquerors and they sent Clark to Earth to rule over it, which is a decision that I think is going to divide a lot of fans. Traditionally, I'm not the biggest fan of Krypton being evil. Remember earlier when I said I had another problem with the film that I wasn't able to talk about until now? This is it. Unless you skipped all of that and went right to the spoiler section, and if so, like, what are you doing, man? I think that having them be conquerors kind of cuts Clark off from his Kryptonian heritage in a sense. When the film introduces this idea that Lex is painting Superman as a bad guy in the public, I thought for sure they were going to pull a Birthright, and we were going to have Lex lead this slander campaign against Clark to the point where the entire world turns on him and he loses trust, and then he has the legal right to finally kill Superman as someone who's trying to take over the Earth. Genuinely a really interesting plan on his part. What I wasn't expecting though was the movie to basically double down on the fact that this message was real. Krypton is actually full of conquerors, and it kind of caught me by surprise because I was waiting for that reveal the entire third act and it never came. So I wouldn't say I was disappointed, I was just really shocked that they're committing to something as bold as Krypton being conquerors. That being said, I became more open to the idea of it because I think you can tell other interesting stories that I was just closed-minded to. I think that the message that comes out of that plotline makes it worth it because I really love the story of Clark learning that it's his actions that define him, and he gets that from Pa Kent and his actual parents on Earth. I think it humanizes him in a way that is really important. It's just something I feel like you could have expanded on a little bit more. Despite how many times they say it's real in the movie, I still feel like we didn't get a definitive answer on if it's the truth or not. We just get Mr. Terrific and Lex Luthor both explaining that it is in fact real, but part of me feels like that story is still left unfinished, and maybe that's done on purpose. Maybe they're going to expand on that in the Supergirl movie, as that also deals a lot with Kryptonian heritage. Especially considering the fact that Kara did live on Krypton with his parents, so she should have been aware of something like this and realistically could have told Clark about it. So that's what really makes me feel like this is unresolved, and we're going to see them expand on this in the Supergirl movie. I think it could be really interesting if this was specifically a House of L problem and not the entirety of Krypton. That way, Clark can still come to terms with his Kryptonian heritage and learn to love his people, just knowing that Krypton isn't defined by his parents and what they wanted it to be, and he can find this connection through Kara and her lineage, and learn to be a superhero of both worlds, because otherwise, if we take it at face value, it kind of muddies the immigrant allegory a little bit. So I would like to see them reconcile with that and really expand on that in a sequel, but in a bubble, I do think it works for this film and the ultimate messaging that we get by the end of it, so I'm not too bothered by it because I do think they left the door open to tell more stories with this concept, and I really connected with the emotional themes that were present in this film. He's confronted by this central message on if he's defined by his people or his actions, and I think that seeing him come to terms with the idea that it doesn't matter what other people are saying about him or what his purpose was supposed to be because he was raised to do good. That conclusion works really well for me. The final scene has Clark once again back in the Fortress of Solitude asking to watch the comforting video of his parents, but instead we get to see this beautiful montage of him growing up in Smallville with Ma and Pa Kent, which was the third and final time I cried in that movie because it's such a beautiful sequence, and I just love to see him embrace his status as someone who was raised by people that loves him and just wants to spread that love across the globe. It really lands, and it gives you a very emotionally resonant ending. I'm still not in love with the overall concept of Krypton being evil and Clark severing his tie from that part of his identity, but they left it open-ended enough that I feel like there's still more story to tell there, so I'm not going to be too harsh on it, and I'm really interested to see how it's going to play when I do rewatch the movie this weekend, knowing what the twist is. Shifting gears here to the other big spoiler of the movie, that being the reveal that Ultraman is actually a Superman clone. Just as I predicted in my video, I like to give myself a little pat on the back for that because I'm very proud I called that, even though I feel like it was the most likely reveal out of them all. And I mentioned earlier on in the review that I think he could have been used a little better, just because I feel like Ultraman didn't do much in the movie to be his own character, if that makes any sense. He was used mostly as a prop by Lex to make him a more defined character and show his hypocrisy as someone who was willing to use metahumans to his own benefit, despite preaching all this stuff about how metahumans are poisoning the earth on news reports and stuff like that. And I do really like that angle, and seeing Clark have to come to blows with someone who is pretty much the exact opposite of everything he represents. Superman is an independent superhero acting on his own free will and doing things for the greater good, trying to make sure that there can be a better tomorrow to protect. And then you have Ultraman enter the fray as someone who is being completely controlled by Lex, to the point where Lex is moving him around like a chess piece, barking orders and telling him to do specific movements where he doesn't even have really any autonomy of his own, it seems like. People are pressing buttons in a control room and he's doing those motions, so he's pretty much a stand-in for Superman to fight, because Lex can't throw hands at all. But I think that it would have been interesting if we got to see more about what Ultraman was under the surface and stuff like that, if he had any emotions, any thoughts on what's happening, rather than just being a complete puppet for Lex. That being said, I don't think this is the last we've seen of Ultraman. Superman beats him by pushing him through a black hole in this movie, and the first thing I said to my friend after this film ended was, I think they just set him up to become Bizarro. I think that getting sucked through that black hole took him to Bizarro World, and we're gonna see eventually down the line whenever they come back to him, how he's degraded over time and is now pretty much the exact opposite of Superman physically, where he's got the heat breath and frost vision, and we get to see how he's evolved on this society in Bizarro World, and he's learned to speak their language in reverse and stuff like that, now that he's been able to get his own free will. And I think that could be a really interesting narrative to expand upon this character. And if that's the case, they've laid a really great foundation for Ultraman. I honestly can't think of many transitions to go between all these different chapters, so I'm just gonna keep jumping around all over the place. I also really like how the movie starts with this opening crawl of sorts that breaks down the lore of the DCU in a very simple way, just kind of ease viewers into this very broad and expansive world. I especially love the gag Gunn does where he counts down the time from 300 years ago, 30 years ago, 3 years ago, 3 months ago, 3 hours ago, 3 minutes ago, and then boom, instantly catching up to where we are in the present. I think it's a very fun way to open the film and a very creative way to introduce audiences to the DCU, catching us up to speed on what we've missed with the Superman side of things. But something that I absolutely loved was how much of Krypto we saw in this movie. He's kind of like the driving force of the narrative. Clark has been tasked with dog-sitting Krypto by someone that we'll get to later on, and when Krypto gets dog-napped in the movie, you see this completely different side of Clark as he's screaming at Luthor and losing control of his temper because he knows what Lex is capable of. I think it's a great way to use Krypto as almost like a MacGuffin in the film, and then once he does get him back, he is entangled in this whole big narrative of freeing all these metahumans and stopping Lex. It's a fun way to use him as an integral piece of the plot that kind of gets everything moving, and also lets us see a completely new side of Clark. Like when Krypto goes missing, and Clark is talking to Lois about how he's trying to find him, and he says that he's not even a very good dog, but he can't stop thinking about the fact that Krypto's all alone and all scared, and he can't live with that thought, and it just goes to show this compassionate side to Superman that we haven't seen, that even a dog feeling alone is something that will have him searching all night long. It's funny to think about how Krypto is almost the emotional driving force of the movie, and it really lets David show his talents as an actor. And considering that Krypto was pretty much entirely CGI in this movie, David Cornsweet has great chemistry with just a tennis ball and a stick, because his dynamic with Krypto is hilarious, where he's constantly being bitten and attacked by him because he just wants to play and roughhouse. And as somebody who has owned a dog and recently lost a dog, it's a really sweet thing seeing that kind of relationship put on the silver screen, and I feel like they do it justice, and it just puts the biggest smile on my face and makes me feel all warm and fuzzy inside. I keep coming back to the idea that this is a comic book come to life, and Krypto might be the single biggest example of that. He's something that other adaptations have been so embarrassed of in the past, but he's so casually introduced in this movie, and I love that. They just have a dog that can fly, and it really sells the over-the-top nature of this universe and how they're fully embracing every single part of Superman's mythos. And might I just say, the CGI on this dog is incredibly impressive. There's not a single frame where he looks like a CGI model moving around, and I don't know how they managed to pull it off, but incredible work from the VFX department. They made that bad dog and they brought him to life in the best possible way. I didn't get a chance to touch on them earlier because I feel like it was better to save them till the spoiler section, but I really like how the Justice Gang are used in this movie. I'm never gonna get used to calling them the Justice Gang. I know they're gonna be doing this as a running bit because they keep making fun of how bad that name is, but please just call them the Justice League sooner rather than later. I think they offer a really interesting perspective in this film and the world that's established that Superman enters as corporatized superheroes, and how he challenges their morals and is just doing things for the sake of wanting to help people. He's not doing it for the attention or the credibility or to try and fund a business or anything silly like that. For example, when the kaiju invades Metropolis and Clark wants to pacify it and get it out of there without killing it, while the Justice Society is basically trying to kill them at all costs, and then you get this really interesting fight scene where Clark is trying to stop them from killing the kaiju all while saving everybody at the same time. It's this impossible situation where he has to decide between if he wants to save the citizens or the giant monster that's about to die. And I just think that's such a great angle to take for Superman, to see him want to prioritize saving even the most deadly monsters so they can be studied or set back into the wilderness or put down in a very peaceful way, where he wants to protect all life, using the Justice Gang as these superheroes who have kind of lost their way, in a sense, to where they're not itching to help Superman once he becomes a fugitive. They're all just kind of sitting around in the Hall of Justice, which looks perfect, by the way. I'm so glad they got the actual location that it was inspired from in the cartoon cartoons in the comics. It's honestly surreal to see that brought into live action, but they're kind of uninspired as superheroes, and they don't really have the motivation to go out and help. It's obvious that Lex is up to something, but they don't have any evidence, so instead of going to do anything, they just lay around while Clark is out there actively trying to put an end to Lex and is stuck in prison. And I really like the idea of using the Justice Gang to show just how inspiring and impactful Superman can be, to the point where his actions is directly inspiring Mr. Terrific to get into the fray. And then when Clark calls in a favor from Guy Gardner and Hawkgirl and Metamorpho, they all see his actions and they want to be more like him, and they're willing to get involved in wars like they didn't want to do before. Guy Gardner has this entire speech where he lies about not wanting to get involved in politics because it's part of the Green Lantern oath. And then we see him change his mind, and he's out there actively stopping this very authoritative regime from hurting these innocent people. And it's all because of Superman's impact on the scene, and I think that is such a great way to directly call out what an icon Superman is and the effect he has on the world around him and every single person in it, down to the superheroes who all want to be more like him. I know that Superman is traditionally the first superhero and he kind of sparks this new era in society, but I really like the take of seeing how he comes in late into the game to where there's already a Justice Gang, there's already supervillains who have been doing things for years now, and when he enters late into the fray, he's able to inspire them in a way that he never could have, as he arrives on the scene and disrupts the status quo with a pure vision for a better tomorrow, unaffected by societal standards because he knows what he's doing is right. And I think that is just peak Superman characterization. I'm gushing over it so much, but it's one of my favorite aspects of the movie and how hopeful he is as this symbol that the entire world can rally around and want to be like. As for the actual members of the Justice Gang, I already talked a little bit about Mr. Terrific, but my god, Eddie Gathegi is incredible in this movie. He has so much calculated charisma. You buy him as being the smartest man in this universe, and I just love to see how confident in himself he is, to where he enters a room and he calls himself the goddamn Mr. Terrific. He knows he's a genius, and he's just kind of fed up with everybody. And the fight scene he has when he and Lois invade Lex's base, and we see everything from Lois's perspective as he just clears house with the T-Spheres, is one of the best fight scenes in any superhero movie. That is how you introduce a character and set them up to be this total badass in a way that makes him just the coolest person ever. If James Gunn is a smart man, he would spin off a Terrifics project with Mr. Terrific and Metamorpho immediately. I am dying to see more of him. And speaking of Metamorpho, he's kind of like the surprise heart of the film in a way, as we see him already locked up by Lex as a prime example of his war against metahumans. He's kidnapped the infamous baby Joey from all the marketing and is ruthlessly keeping him hostage just so he could use Metamorpho to synthesize kryptonite and keep Superman at bay. Metamorpho is probably the most direct example of someone who is inspired by Superman's actions. He sees how Clark is talking to Lex, and he's buying more into the idea that he could be someone who helps people and uses these abilities for good, to the point where he makes a sun in his hands to help Clark get out of prison. It is so cool, and his powers either look incredibly creepy or great, and I'm happy with both. And the prosthetics are incredible on Anthony Carrigan. I don't know how long it took him to get into that suit, but it is worth it because good lord, it looks like they just ripped Metamorpho off the comic page and brought him into real life. Then of course we have Guy Gardner, Green Lantern, played by Nathan Fillion, who is just a complete and total asshole. One of the most annoying characters I've ever seen, so basically he's perfect. Considering the runtime and that this is in fact not Guy Gardner's movie, he could have very easily been a one-note character whose only personality trait is that he is incredibly annoying, but the movie goes a step further to actually give him really impactful moments for his character arc to show that yeah, he is really aggravating to be around, but he genuinely cares about what he does, and I think that's really important in building the foundational blocks of a Guy Gardner characterization. He's someone you just can't help but hate and cringe at, but it's not done in a way that makes the narrative unenjoyable. He's just the punching bag of this movie where everybody makes fun of him and his stupid bowl cut, but he has this cockiness to him because he knows he can back up what he's saying with his Green Lantern powers, as he tries to aura farm but looks absolutely pathetic doing it because again, he's Guy Gardner. You can never take this guy seriously. That being said though, his powers are so good. This is the best a Green Lantern has ever looked in live action, which admittedly is not a very high bar, but I love how creative the constructs are as we're seeing him use things like oven mitts and a middle finger to attack tanks. It feels like there's so much personality in the way he fights, and that is what we've been missing from Green Lanterns in live action. I'm very interested to see how he's going to work in the Lantern series, since we know he's going to pop up there, and if his characterization is going to be as funny and lighthearted as this, or if he's going to fit that more true crime tone. But I'm glad that we're going to see more of him because it's really good casting and he's just so unlikable. I really just want to punch him in the face. And then also the team has a Hawk too. They do have Hawkgirl on the team, and I think that Isabella Merced is great casting and looks great in the role for a wide variety of reasons. I would have liked to have seen more from her because I think that she is such a talented actress, and I feel like we just scratched the surface with her. I also understand that this is a Superman movie first and foremost, and she serves her purpose in the narrative. I just hope that she has a future in the DCU where we can dive further into her backstory. Her fighting style is really cool. I love that she just kills and drops the dictator like he's nothing. I'm glad that she got her moment like that, but I do feel like out of everybody in the Justice Gang, she suffers the most from the runtime and the pacing, to where we don't get to see her outside of like 3 minutes on screen. But as a whole, it's nice to see this team moving away from being these corporatized heroes, and I'm very interested to see how that's going to carry out in the future of the DCU. And hopefully it means that everybody besides Mr. Terrific can get new costumes soon and get those more comic accurate looks. But I was very interested to see how the Justice Gang would fit into this movie, because there's already a lot of characters in the film, and I should have had faith the entire time because it's James Gunn we're talking about. This man has mastered the ensemble cast, and I feel like he's just flexing at this point with how many different characters he can introduce and make you care about in such a short amount of time. Or in the case of someone like Lex Luthor, absolutely hate him because, oh my god, he does so many insane things in this movie just to screw over Superman. I genuinely couldn't believe it. The fact that he casually says something like he recreated the Big Bang on his own just to make a pocket dimension is insane, but that kind of comic book insanity that I have been wanting to see for so long. And then seeing everything he has going on in this pocket dimension with the ridiculous amount of people he has held hostage down there, or the infinite monkey theorem as he has an army of monkeys attached to typewriters just to mess with Superman on social media, is the funniest thing ever. I was losing my mind in that theater. The fact that Clark makes a joke earlier on in the movie about how mad he is about the hashtag super shit that people are calling him online, only to then get the reveal that it's been Lex the entire time, is a masterclass in making him the most evil villain of all time, just on pure hatred alone. Do you know how dedicated you have to be to create a pocket dimension and teach monkeys how to operate a typewriter just so Superman would be constantly harassed on social media? He could have built an algorithm to do that, but no, he put actual monkeys on typewriters just so he could test out the infinite monkey theorem. This man is an evil mastermind. He is making scientific breakthroughs as a side hobby and keeping it all to himself just so he can f over Superman. We're lucky that he's obsessed with Superman, because if he wasn't, he probably could have taken over the world already. I can't get enough of this version of Lex. He is so utterly vindictive, and I want him dead, but at the same time, I want him to stick around forever. But I do really like how Lex is the mirror opposite of Clark in a lot of ways, to where he grew up with the silver spoon in his mouth and now is this billionaire running the largest tech company on the planet and has little to no regard for humanity in the slightest. He looks at them as tools to get the job done, taking advantage of them at every opportunity, literally sacrificing people just to make Superman angry. It is so messed up, and it is exactly what Lex Luthor should be. He is just this force of evil and someone who is going to make the world bend at his whim. But it's also then incredibly inspirational to see Superman fight back against that as this working class hero fighting a billionaire war profiteer. But I also really like that while Superman and Mr. Terrific are able to fight Lex and his Raptors and stop him from splitting the city in half, it's Lois who's the one that's actually able to take Lex down, and it just shows how integral to the plot she is, that everyone on the Daily Planet side, it works together to expose the dirt that's on Lex. And it's a great way to naturally tie together the different aspects of Clark's life as the A plot and the B plot collide to bring Lex to justice, where Superman is dealing with the physical threats and Lois on the ground level with Jimmy and other people who are doing this investigative work to make sure that these criminals actually go away. And it isn't just Superman kicking a billionaire's ass, but actually making sure that he ends up in prison. And I have been waiting for so long to finally talk about Jimmy Olsen in this movie, because boy, there's a lot to talk about. He has such a surprising and welcomed role in this film. I am such a Jimmy Olsen enthusiast. I think he is one of the most fascinating Superman side characters because he's pretty much done it all, and I feel like there's been this void of Jimmy Olsen in every Superman adaptation, but he has such a prominent supporting role as maybe the fourth biggest character in this movie, where he gets his own side plot as we get to see him working alongside the rest of the Daily Planet to take down Lex, which, by the way, just like Jimmy, I'm so glad to see the Daily Planet staff being featured in the movie this much, to where they all join Lois on the battlefield in Mr. Terrific's T-Craft, flying around and doing whatever they can to get the scoop on Lex. I especially love to see someone like Cat Grant, but Beck Bennett is such a funny addition to Steve Lombard. He has maybe my favorite delivery in the entire movie when he's screaming about how he doesn't have a seat on the ship. But when it comes to Jimmy specifically, first of all, Skylar Gisondo, flawless casting. He feels like that plucky, optimistic Jimmy Olsen that you've always wanted. Someone who is just this charm to be around and an absolute ladies' man apparently. But I can't wait to see him become Superman's best pal. I feel like they're gonna have such an exciting dynamic in future installments as he just is this menace making Superman's life infinitely more challenging. As for specifics on Jimmy's subplot, I don't think it's gonna be for everybody. It's very out there and probably the most James Gunn thing in this movie, how Jimmy Olsen has this on-again, off-again relationship with Miss Tessmacher as she's trying to get free from Lex's abuse, and she is Jimmy's source on the inside, and this connection that Jimmy has with her pretty much saves the day as she secretly sends him a bunch of sexy selfies and in the background has been having all this proprietary information that Lex doesn't want to get out, and she sneakily sends it all to Jimmy, and that is their silver bullet to take him down and prove that he's been trying to overthrow a country. So while the idea that Jimmy Olsen saves the day by having this ridiculous relationship with Eve Tessmacher might be a lot for people, I personally loved it just because I think it is such an on-brand thing for Jimmy Olsen to do. He is a crazy character in the Superman comics because he's literally done it all. Literally the first appearance of DC's ultra big bad Darkseid was in a Jimmy Olsen comic, okay? They get crazy, like drinking a vial of mysterious liquid and becoming a giant turtle man of all things. This is pretty tame in comparison. So seeing something like this feels very in line with a classic Jimmy Olsen side quest. I just think it's very fun to see him involved in the mix and have his dynamic with Lois and Clark really explored in the film. I've really missed seeing that trio in live action, so this movie made me really happy to see them circle back around to that. As for the future of the DCU and what this movie sets up, it honestly doesn't seem to be focused on setting up the future very much, just kind of introducing it, if that makes any sense. The movie is pretty much putting these pieces on the board for other creatives to play around with. There's no direct teases for a Superman sequel. Both post-credit scenes are little moments. One, which is so sweet, of Superman and Krypto on the moon, and we see Krypto finally calming down with Clark. I think that is my favorite shot in the entire movie and genuinely made my eyes well up. I thought I was gonna cry for a fourth time. And then the final post-credit scene is just a joke where Clark accidentally makes Mr. Terrific angry and he's thinking that he's a jerk when he's the nicest person in the universe. I don't know why I'm explaining this. You get the joke. But it really just feels like an introduction rather than adding in all these lingering plot threads that need to be solved elsewhere. And I appreciate that. It's much more about kickstarting this universe than it is about trying to get you to go watch the next thing. The closest it comes to actually setting something up is when we get the first appearance of Supergirl in the DCU, which I really love to see. I don't think I've seen Millie Alcock in anything besides this, but I love the attitude her Kara has as this rebellious, drunk Supergirl who has a real attitude problem and clashes with Clark's wholesome southern upbringing. I feel like it sets them apart in a really interesting way that I'm not used to seeing. I've done such a good job avoiding spoilers for the Woman of Tomorrow comic because I want to be able to read it after the movie so I don't give myself these astronomical expectations, because I've heard so many people say that it's one of the best comics of the 21st century, and as much as I am dying to read it, I'm gonna try and wait till after the movie, so I can't wait to see what she gets up to there. And her suit is gorgeous. I really like the suit design they went with and how similar it is to the Corn Sweat outfit, the only difference being the skirt, but I think that it fits her really well and is just a gorgeous translation of that comic suit. It's gonna look so pretty for an entire movie. Her and Krypto traveling the galaxy sounds like it's gonna be fascinating, so I'm really looking forward to that. And we don't have to wait long too, as it's gonna be next year, which is so exciting. We also get a surprise cameo from Peacemaker in this, which caught me completely by surprise. I did not think that would happen in the slightest. I had a feeling we'd see Supergirl considering how early they cast her, but Peacemaker on the TV as a conspiracy theorist worked so well and is incredibly in line with his character. I still have no idea how they're gonna work out the continuity, but I do really like just seeing him and seeing that the DCU is so cohesive already. It's just another way that it feels like the comics, where any character could pop up at any time. It really feels like the universe is alive and you're gonna be bumping into these characters everywhere you go. This movie has done such a great job with the world building of the DC universe and has me incredibly excited for the future and what comes next. I know James Gunn has teased that he's already writing a follow-up movie to this that will include Superman, which I'm personally hoping is a world's finest movie between him and Batman, but I would love if we get something like a Superman and Supergirl team up and we see them fight someone like Brainiac, and maybe that's where we explore more of the Kryptonian heritage. That would be my ideal Superman sequel, I think, but James Gunn has my full trust. This movie blew me away. It's finally a Superman movie that made me feel so hopeful that I wanted to run through a wall. I was honestly so speechless when the credits started rolling rolling, but the one thing I knew is that this movie made me feel so happy and warm inside. It's the film we absolutely needed right now because, let's be real, everything sucks. Nothing's good right now, but Superman is a bright spot, and it's 2 hours where I can just completely get lost in the world of DC and explore these vibrant, over-the-top ideas that just make me feel like I've entered a comic book and I'm seeing these panels flip through in live action. It's the shot of adrenaline that the superhero genre needed as it revitalized things and shows what you can do with these characters when you're not limited to realism, giving us this new take on Superman that really embraces everything he stands for in the comics as this beacon of hope and positivity. It's the Superman movie I've always dreamed of, and while it has some problems, I left that theater believing we could make a difference. If there's one thing I haven't been able to get out of my head, it's the idea that kindness is the real punk rock, and being there to support others is the way we should all live our lives. I think that is such an endearing message to take away from this film, and is something that's going to stick with me for the rest of my life. Hold on, that makes it sound like I wasn't a nice person before this. I promise you I was. Just as a constant reminder to try and find the beauty in things. And even now, all these hours later, as it's nearly 2 a.m. when I'm recording this, I'm still smiling. But what did you think of James Gunn's Superman? I would genuinely love to hear what everyone has to say and continue the conversation down below. And while you're at it, you may as well give the video a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. If you don't do it, I'm gonna kidnap your dog. And if you don't have a dog, I'm gonna give you a dog and then I'm gonna kidnap it.